Can you all see my presentation?
Yeah.
Yep.
1 second, sorry. Okay. All right. Thanks everybody for joining. The topic today is curing paralysis from overanalysis, a lesson in data storytelling. This is a continuation of our data storytelling series that was kicked off by Sri. The focus here is on finance, and further in the series will be customer success, sales, product, and other departments as well. The learning objectives for this: understand the importance of building narratives to explain complex data. We're going to develop visuals that support your narrative. We're going to demonstrate how to pinpoint the data that matters. We're going to explain how to pick the right visuals and avoid the wrong visuals. The agenda: intro to data storytelling. I'm going to try to limit this to under 40 minutes. That's the hope. Example data story. So we're going to actually go through the subscription retention dashboard. Use cases for subscription retention. So finance is going to do some show and telling, and then future data stories. Okay, let's get started. Intro to data storing. So data storytelling is the ability to effectively communicate insights from a data set using narratives and visualizations, right? So what does that mean? We're trying to elicit actions through insights and lessons learned, right? And actions could be a functional change, or it could be new research and a brand new story. So what is the workflow of data storytelling? It all begins with research. So in order to tell a proper story, you have to do research. Once you have that research, you can then translate that into a story. That story might create some action, and also might create additional research and produce additional stories. Part of the point here is that data storytelling is a tool, but really it's part of a larger conversation, right, about the business or whatever you're showing. So I want to touch on analysis paralysis. So oftentimes what happens when someone is stuck in an analysis paralysis is you're stuck between collecting data and analyzing data. It occurs when during the data research phase, usually. It occurs when goals or questions are unclear or unfocused. Maybe you don't have the data required to answer the question, so you're just digging and digging and digging, and you're getting nowhere. You're not interpreting the data correctly or distilling it. And possibly also you're working in a silo. It's very important through the process of data storytelling to collaborate, bounce ideas off others, and just make sure you're heading in the right direction. So how do we cure it? We have to break things out into more parts, right? So if you're stuck focusing on collecting data and analyzing, then you're probably starting in the wrong spot. Really, where you really should begin is asking the right question, right? So what are you trying to achieve through this data storytelling process? So we have to ask the right question. We have to interpret. So what does it mean? What does the question really mean? We need to analyze. What kind of analysis is this? We need to collect data. Which data is needed to do that analysis? Once we have the data, we can prepare the data. We can move back to performing an analysis on that data. We can interpret the results. And finally, we can answer the question. Now, what we're talking about here is the research phase. And once you've done that research, you can gather artifacts to then inform the story, right? So these are two parts of data storytelling, research, and the story that encompass the entire process. So let's talk about story arc. The first step in the story arc is your setup and context. So you want to orient the audience, you want to show the scope of the data, explain related concepts, right? So really get the audience ready and understanding where you're coming from. The second stage is conflict. So show how the data is changing in a meaningful way. Use that to then build a story, right? This is the crux of the whole arc. Present a question from that story, from the data, and then show data that supports the question, right? And then if you've done both of those steps, then you move through to resolution. And here's where you finally answer the question, explain how you got to the answer. You're going to show evidence. You're going to explain any lessons that were learned, and you're going to explain any actions that need to be taken as a result. So let's talk about this a little bit further. Some tips on story arc. The biggest point here that I would point out is don't begin with the answer, right? So we talked about setup and context, moving on to conflict, moving on to resolution. Don't begin with your resolution. Sometimes it can be easy to want to do that. You're like, hey, I did all this research, I found this conclusion, let me just show it to you, and then we can review the supporting data later. Well, to tell a good story, an engaging story, you definitely want to follow this process. So lead, don't railroad, don't dictate, be conversational while maintaining that lead. Bring the audience with you. You want to turn your ideas into the audience's ideas, right? People prefer their own ideas over other people's. So if you can kind of convince them or bring them with you, then they feel like it's like they have some ownership. Build the context. Build the context like the audience has limited knowledge of the topic, right? So explain it in a way that can be understood by basically anyone. Assume the audience is smarter than you, right? Okay, so let's back up. Let's look at the full picture of data storytelling. So we've gone through all of our cycles of research. It could be mini cycles. We've gathered artifacts and we've put those into various points in our story to make it engaging and compelling. Next, let's talk about mediums of data storytelling. So what are you going to use to do your research? What are you going to use to do your story, right? So for research, there's an exploratory approach. There's interactive dashboards through Sisense and reports. You can go write some SQL. You can dump some data into Excel, mash up the data there. Maybe you need to read articles or read documents. There's also, for research, there's partnerships, right? So you don't have to do all this stuff by yourself. And oftentimes you're going to be more successful if you have a partner. So those partners could be data science, they could be business intelligence folks, they might be some analysts, and then just generally having conversations, partnering with groups of people, partnering with other experts in different areas. Once you have that research, or you want to tell your story, and where do you want to tell that story? There's lots of different tools. You can use PowerPoint, like I'm using now. You might use a dashboard in Sisense or a report. You could whiteboard it. You might write it up in like a formal paper. Maybe you'll email it. You could do video recording. Maybe it's a napkin discussion, right? Maybe it's so important that you just literally print it out and go run to your boss's office and bust down his door and show it to him. So how do you choose these things, right? There's a lot of options here. And the way that you choose is you have to basically understand the variables, right, that are involved, such as time constraints, right? Is it something we really have to get an answer for by tomorrow, or is this something that we're just kind of casually researching, or is there some big board presentation we have to give out to do next month? Skill set. So if you don't have certain skill sets for SQL or other things, maybe you can't do certain options, or you have to rely on other people. Costs. So if some product costs a lot. Importance, right? Which kind of plays back to time constraints. And then your audience. So you want to make sure that the tools you pick for your story specifically make sense based on the audience that you're going to be presenting to. So let's focus in on dashboards, right? So as far as the medium for data storytelling, why use dashboards? Well, I'm using a dashboard for this presentation for the walkthrough that we're going to do. And so I'm also trying to proselytize our tools and our BI department. And so I'm trying to convince basically you to use dashboards as much as possible because I love them. So why use dashboards? Dashboards can be tools for data research and storytelling. Dashboard development is iterative. It's a collaboratory process. And when you build an excellent dashboard, usually it can solve many use cases. Dashboards can lend itself to self-service. And then lastly, democratizing data storytelling. So using dashboards can allow folks to research, and it gives the tools to a wide audience for doing their own data storytelling. Data storytelling tips. The 4 pillars of success are distill, display, declutter, and direct. Distilling is extracting the essential meaning from the data. So maybe you have a large data set, you need to do some kind of calculations, transformations to squeeze out that meaning. You're going to maybe filter it and then eventually produce lots of different pretty visuals. Display. So you've produced a bunch of visuals. Now you need to present them in a way that's very clear, not confusing. Highlighting insights can be useful. So you'll see the chart on the left is like kind of a cluttered mess. If I was just talking about this chart, you may not really understand what I'm trying to point out because you don't know what line to look at, whereas the one on the right, one stream is highlighted, whereas all the rest are grayed out. So it focuses your eye on the thing that I'm talking about. Declutter. So remove unsupporting research artifacts. You've produced a ton of visuals. You have some emotions about those visuals, right? You built those things. They've become important to you. However, are they really going to support your story? Remove the ones that don't matter. Declutter. So remove unsupporting research artifacts, right? So you've picked the ones that matter. Now you need, I'm sorry, I duplicated that text. The last one is display. No, that's wrong. The last one is direct. Sorry, y'all. So direct. We've picked the visuals that make sense for us. We're going to direct folks from our data to our visuals, and then eventually to some idea and actions, which goes back to the overarching story arc. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, so now we're going to walk through the subscription retention dashboard to show you an example of a data story. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is assume that no one has seen the subscription retention cohort report. So I'm going to try to keep it brief, but walk through this help document that shows you how to read and understand the subscription retention dashboard. So context. This walkthrough will help you understand what subscription retention means, how is it calculated. So let's get some background. Subscription retention measures how long subscriptions are active for a given population. We currently are focusing on B2C, but we plan to work on B2B as well. What subscription retention isn't? So it doesn't measure things like retention over the life of a subscriber. This is focused on the individual subscriptions, right? And one subscriber could have multiple subscriptions. Okay, so now let's do the setup, give you some context. So we're going to start with talking about a smaller population of the report. So B2C subscriptions who started during December 2020. There's about 1,500. 83 of those have ended after 1 month. So 83 subscription ended within 1 month of them starting. So let's be interactive here. Why might subscriptions end? Let me make sure I look at the chat. And I'll write in your responses here. So someone has a subscription. Why might their subscription end?
They might have graduated.
Might have graduated.
Didn't like the product.
Didn't like the product, right? So they canceled.
Their free trial ended.
Free trial ended. And they just either churned or maybe they resubscribed, whatever. If they resubscribed, right, that's also, I guess that's kind of a what happened next. Subscription might have ended per schedule, right? Any other comments?
Issues, they might have been canceled accidentally.
What did you say?
Payment issues, they might have been canceled accidentally.
Ah, yeah.
I was
So
just gonna say that failed payment.
failed payment. Yeah, those all make sense. So subscriptions end, right? And they might end because they're supposed to end, and that's not bad, right? Maybe the person resubscribes, or maybe they canceled, maybe they graduated. Graduated is an interesting one because hopefully, you know, we catch that subscription ending, we catch that person, and we get them subscribed to a new subscription for some product that helps them as a doctor, right? So like just the fact of a subscription ending doesn't really mean anything, like good or bad. Okay, let's move on. Thanks for the participation. Okay, so back to our 1,500 December 2020 subscribers, 83 finished as we discussed. 1,400 of those are still active after 1 month. So let's focus on subscriptions that remain active, right? This isn't a churn analysis, this is a retention analysis. So let's focus on those. So how do we calculate it? Retention. 1 month retention would be the number of users who are still active from that population after 1 month divided by the starting population. So 1404 divided by 1487 gives us a 1 month retention of 94%. So now let's look at folks who are still active after 2 months, which is 755. So 755 over the original 1,500 gives us a 2 month retention at 51%. Right, so for this population, we would say after 1 month, 94% are still with us, still active. After 2 months, 51%. So let's take that concept, let's summarize it, and let's graph it. So on the left here is taking that same concept, so start month of December 2020, and then we're iterating through life months since that population started. A life month indicates just the number of months relative to the beginning of something, some time frame. So we progress through, we have our starting population still, right? So 1487. We track how many of those are active over time, how many are left, and then we calculate the retention for each of those life months. And then if we graph that retention rate, it tells us for this population, so for people who subscribed in December 2020, over time, how do their subscriptions end, right? We can see each month, month 1, month 2, month 3, etc. We can basically watch the population run out or dwindle down as subscriptions end for various reasons. Questions? Any questions so far? Okay. Pretty nifty, right?
John, you did
Yes.
say that these were monthly subscriptions, right?
Good question. I did not say what they were exactly. So these are just these are a hodgepodge of B2C subscriptions who started in December, which would have monthly fixed, 1 month, multiple, upfront, annual, that auto renew. So this is a hodgepodge of different things. And this is, if you just look at all of them across those different kinds of subscriptions, this is how that retention looks.
I see. I was just asking because when you get to the month 12, 13, and 14, I'm wondering how many of those were annual subscriptions versus those that were monthly subscriptions.
That's a fantastic point. And we can actually dive into that question later if we have time. Okay, so questions. Why use, I said index, that should be life months. Life months. Why use life month? What could retention rates be used for? Just any thoughts this far that we've gone through? Just any thoughts or ideas that have come up for anyone? Why do we use life month instead of like the actual calendar date? Any thoughts?
Well, it allows us to compare the same population over time, as opposed to changing populations every month.
So comparing populations, different populations over time. So what do you mean by compare them? Because I mean, can't we just like look at the date?
Oh, no, I mean, this allows us to kind of hone in on one population and see how they perform over a period of time. Whereas if you look at each month, it's a different population of people. So it's kind of just, it's measuring two totally different things.
Yeah, makes sense. Any thoughts or ideas on what could this retention rate be used for?
Retention rates can be used to predict what's going to happen with future new subscriptions and therefore kind of predict revenue going forward.
Sure. So it tells you the roll-off rate for various populations, which then you can use those curves for predictions. What else could it be used for?
You might use
How
it
about
the different types of marketing or different types of retention changes, improve that
Yes.
curve.
Absolutely. So historical trends, right? Meaning, how does this retention curve look for different populations? So Chris mentioned like maybe marketing campaigns or changes to products or trials, right? So comparing populations across history. Okay, excellent points. All right, so let's introduce a term, cohort. So cohort studies are a type of longitudinal study, which is an approach that follows a population over a period of time. That's all longitudinal study means. So what does that mean? So we can analyze characteristics within a cohort and also compare different cohorts against each other to look for changes. Right, so this kind of goes back to what Chris Tolan was saying. Our cohort in this analysis groups the populations of subscriptions by subscription start month. So subscription start month is our cohort. That's basically how we're defining our cohorts in this case. In other cohort studies, we might use registration date or first subscription date. Right, we might look at the users buy their first subscription, not every single subscription they have, which is what we're doing here. So now that we have our definitions, let's take our single cohort example from December 2020 and extend it to a larger range. So let's look at all cohorts, which again is the month a subscription started. Let's look at all cohorts from March 1st, 2020 to February 28, 2022. So that's 24 cohorts, right? And also 24 months, almost. So that includes, those 24 cohorts includes 67,000 subscriptions. So 67,000 subscriptions started over that range of time, right? So this is the context. So if we pivot life month from rows to columns, we can now compare life month across cohorts, right? This goes to what Josh Farmer was describing about why we would use life month instead of calendar dates, right? So this table on the left is what you were seeing before. It has cohorts, right, when the subscription started, and then the life month, which is the amount of time that has passed since the cohort began. So February 2022 has a life month of 0. This data is from the end of February. January has a life month of 0, which is January, and also life month of 1, which is February. Right? December has December, January, and February. Right? So as we move through these are older and older cohorts, so they've had more time since the subscription started, and thus more life months attached to them. So if we take this view and we pivot these life months out into columns, it looks like this, right? And this goes back to what Farmer was saying. Now we've lined up the data in a way that we can compare the retention rates across all the cohorts by life month. Okay, let's load some data in. So as before, we have starting population. So here's all of our cohorts. Here's the starting populations for each of those. Now, we move through each of the life months here, right, horizontally. And for each of those life months, we have an active remaining population. And then we have the retention rate, right? So if we walk across December 2021, the starting population was 1,010. After 1 month, the active subscriptions was 630, which is a retention rate of 62%. After 2 months, it was 495, which is a retention rate of 49%, and so on. Right? And so again, looking at the table this way allows us to compare the 1 month retention rates across cohorts, compare the 2 month retention rates, 3 months retention rates, etc. Any questions? Does that all make sense? Okay, so let's graph what we've done. So we graphed one of them before, right? So December 2020 cohort looked like this, the retention rate for it over their life months. And on the right, if we take all the data across all the cohorts, and we graph in the same way, it looks like this. Now I've highlighted the same cohort on this right graph that's highlighted, that's from the left graph. And when all the other cohorts are gray. And so when we see those now, it's not very clear, right? Like what exactly is happening, but hey, we've graphed it. So it's a little messy. The cat would agree. So let's try to simplify where we're heading. Let's limit the life month to 1, right? So if we just look at the life month 1 here and just look at these data points, that should make things a little bit simpler, right? So then maybe we can start deriving some value out of this. Recently, we pivoted life month to align them across cohorts, right? So what if we pivot the graph in a similar way? So we're going to pivot life month instead of cohort, just for month 1 retention. So we're going to take this graph that looked like chaos, couldn't really tell the cohorts apart. We're going to filter that down just to 1 life month, right? That's what we have here. And then we're going to pivot the life month so that now the x-axis is the cohort date. And now those vertical dots become horizontal dots. So each of these dots is the 1 month retention rate for each of the cohorts. And we still have this orange one, right, which is from our original December 2020 population, or 2020 cohort. So now let's take that graph with all those dots and let's connect them. And now when we connect the dots, now we have a line that looks like this on the right. So this is, again, the retention, the 1 month retention rate across all of the various cohorts. So let's add more life months now that we've understood how to do that. So this graph, now that you've understood how we've pivoted the retention curves for each of the life months, we've added in additional life months. So brown is the month 1 retention rate across cohorts. Pink is month 2 retention rate. Green is month 3, and so on. So this kind of view allows us to line up the life months so we can see how they're trending and how they're changing over time. So now we can compare retention for many life months across all cohorts and understand how it's changing over time. Let's get into the data story. So now that you have context on subscription retention, let's look at an example of conflict and resolution, right? Those are the next steps in the data storytelling process. So conflict, did you notice that there was a dip in month 1 retention starting in August 2021?
How could you not?
How could you not?
Yes.
So let's look at this table again. I've focused month 1 retention in orange so that it stands out. And we can see here around August that the retention rate plummets. It goes from 96%, 93%, all the way down to 63%. So what might have caused month 1 retention to drop in August 2021? Any ideas?
Change from a 30-day trial to a 7-day trial.
Ryan O'Keefe. Nice.
Nailed it.
You freaking nailed it. Now, did you just have that date handy, or how did you come up with that?
No,
He
when
was
I saw
involved in
that
that
dip.
study.
What'd you say?
Insider information.
I kind of,
But
yeah, I
hey,
was
but still, one
actively,
cat cash dollar for you, for sure.
I was involved in it, but to be perfectly honest, when you showed the graph, it like,
Yep.
the story jumped out to me. I was like, oh, what happened? And then I was like, yeah, I remember, we changed.
That is awesome. I love hearing that. So the next question is like, is this good or bad? Is it bad that retention rates go down for month one? Any answers, responses as you want. You don't have to answer, but
How did it
opinions.
affect, yeah, how did it affect the overall retention rate longer? Because I mean, it was just the 1 month.
Yes.
Make it more retention better, or did it improve anything else?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the point is here like we don't have enough information, right? It's kind of we need more. All right, so let's move on.
We did
So
see
now
the retention improving, right, after making a 30 to 7 day trial. Caitlin is here, probably.
we do see it improving.
Yeah.
So analysis and resolution. So like Ryan called out, there is a correlation to trials. And so when I was going through this, I basically used explorative analysis to discover that there was a correlation. I saw the retention rates dropped only when a subscription started with a trial. So this graph on the left, the green line is if they started with a trial, you can see the drop. And if they didn't start with the trial, there's no effect. And so you can't get all your answers from data, right? This still doesn't tell me, is it good, is it bad, what happened, right? Like if Ryan didn't call that out, I wouldn't know what, just because they started with a trial, like why is that impacting it? Right? You can't get all the answers from data. Correlation is not causation. You have to talk to other people to validate assumptions. You have to get the rest of the history. You have to have conversations. It's necessary. So through this process, after some inquiring, we found out that around August 2021, the business officially launched the 7-day trial subscriptions, 7-day subscription trials, and rolled off of other trial links, just like Ryan mentioned. And so even though you can't necessarily get all the answers from data, you can confirm information that you receive from conversations, right? So this chart shows 7-day trial, percent of total subscriptions for these cohorts over time. So what percent is 7-day versus not 7-day? And you can see they start to come in and then they take over by September. And it's all 7-day. So all the green is 7-day trials. So as Chris Tolan was pointing out, do 7-day trials cause a drop in retention beyond 1 life month for cohorts starting in August 2021. So once we look at the second month, we can apply a trend to it. You can see it's pretty flat. You can see that basically, no, it's not affecting, past 1 month. Right. So for a life month of for 2-month retention rates, the trend is flat. So what does that mean, right? So if you kind of pull back and you think about so 7-day trials have started, they reduce the 1-month retention rate, but don't affect the second month. Well, when you have some conversations and think through it, it's logical, right? 7-day trials have caused a drop in 1-month retention rate because users who have no intention to retain are filtered out within the first month. Right, so previous trial periods were 30+ days, which was actually causing functionally an artificial retention lift, since many users who had no intention to retain maintained a subscription into starting the second month, right? So it looks like they were retaining, but it was just a trial. So since the second month retention is not impacted, we know that this means that those who intend to retain do retain and are forced to subscribe earlier than they would have with a 30-day trial. This adds a lift to the lifetime value by getting an additional month's subscription purchase that would have otherwise been given away by a longer trial. So that is the data story. This data story that we journeyed through related to retention, subscription retention dropping after 1 month, after one life month. Any thoughts on these lessons? Does anyone disagree? Does this align with what y'all are seeing? Ryan, Kaylin? Awfully quiet.
Oh, this looks, yeah.
Okay. Obvious stuff, you already knew it probably, but we didn't know it at the time, right? And we had to look at the data to get there, at least from our perspective. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation at the 44-minute mark. So subscription retention dashboard use cases. So we just showed you basically one use case of the subscription retention cohort dashboard. Let's pause actually, let's show that dashboard briefly. So I walked everyone through basically how the dashboard works as far as the data. Let's talk about the actual dashboard. So now that you all understand what the data is, how it works, how it's organized, how it's calculated, you now have the skill set to use this dashboard for some purpose, right? And so this dashboard is interactive, like we were talking about earlier. That's the benefit of dashboards, especially for the research phase of the data storytelling process. So you can come in here, you can group retention rates by various attributes, by track, trial flag, domestic. You know, those retention rates are pivoted here, like you were just seeing, by cohort for the life month. There's filters in here, so you could, like Ryan was kind of calling out, you could hone in on specific plan types, specific tracks. So between grouping the data and filtering the data, you can basically get at anything you need to get at related to subscription retention. Okay, back to the dashboard, or back to the presentation, I mean. So I've just described the use case for finance. Ali, do you want to give any words on how y'all are using the dashboard besides this data storytelling?
Yeah, so we're using the dashboard to pretty much communicate into our model how these subscription cohorts are going to behave over time. And what's been nice about it is that as we're seeing it as, you know, we started the cohorts in 2020, and as we build more and more cohorts into it, the predictive analysis should be more accurate. And what's nice about this feature is what John was pointing out, is that not only are we able to do it by cohort, but we're also able to do it by degree. That way, if certain degrees begin and retain at different times, we can use that to communicate to the model. And then John's going to go into it next, but the next step for us would be to not only look at the subscription retention, but to be more of a, rather than being a subscription focused retention curve, let's get to a subscriber retention curve. That way we can at least follow a user from the beginning of their OME life all the way to the end. Subscription cohort is great, but the next step is that subscriber level view. Yeah.
Thank you, Ali. Yeah, so Ali kind of talked through some of the stuff we'll be working on next as far as our analytical approach, our research steps, right? For telling data stories. And there's also going to be other non-finance related data stories coming up from customer success, from sales, from product. I don't know, Shri, if you want to talk about any of that, but those will be coming up soon.
We're just pipelining them. I just talked to Ryan recently, and Ryan graciously agreed to do it in the next few weeks. So we need to set the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
And sales and customer success. We will approach them next, kind of a thing, to kind of like take case studies like you did for finance with the subscription retention cohort. We'll just take a case study and then just go over how we are telling a story with data. So yeah,
Excellent. Excited about that.
Coming up.
I want to make one call out. So this was sort of our journey between like me and Ali and a few others, kind of digging into why the retention, 1 month retention rate was dropping. In parallel, data science, Caitlin, Josh Farmer, there were other folks independently researching the performance of 7-day trials. So we went through this process, and then we ended up talking to them, and they're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And they showed us what they produced, which could be another opportunity for this data story series. But they essentially found that kind of the same thing we're seeing, but from the other side, they were seeing churn was reducing for 7-day trials, and basically showed that, kind of the inverse story of what we're seeing. I don't know, Caitlin or Farmer, if y'all want to lay any more information out on that, but just wanted to point that out. Okay, so I went almost 10 minutes longer than I planned to. I apologize to the group for that. That's the end of my presentation. Let's open it up for questions and comments.
That's a great job there, John. Really good work. We started with supporting all the data storytelling stuff that we presented so far, and that was wonderful, and taking that into finance story. Ali, do you want to kind of give any finishing touches to it?
The only thing I want to say is that John perfectly captured the story of the SciSense retention cohort, and he explained it much better than I did in my previous presentation. So John, that help page is tremendously built and very informative. And yeah,
I'd like to
go ahead.
Go ahead. I'd say I'd like to carry forward the compliments there onto the data engineers on our team. We couldn't have built it without the proper data modeling in EDW.
Yeah.
So thanks to them.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ali, I cut you off. Was there more?
A great team effort.
No, the last thing I'll put on note to it is that I think this is a good example of what can be built with working with the DAG team. There was a lot of effort put into this, and John did a perfect way. It is an excellent example of a data analyst who listens to the audience, understands the problem, and works with you to tell the story. So yeah, nothing, much love to that team and John.
Awesome.
Any other questions about the presentation?